it looks beautiful, and it just feels like a very, very good space. And that's due entirely to all of you and to your collective energy, and for showing up on a Monday evening. Yes, the food is great, awesome, but to talk about and dig into a topic that I think is really important to a lot of us. So I'm Mandy Smoker Broaddus. I am from Montana, and I'll talk a little bit about Montana's work related to Indian education for all. We are very fortunate, not by any effort on my own, but because we had trailblazers 25 to 30 years ago that fought tirelessly to ensure that Indian education was taught in all of our schools across Montana. And so I stood on the shoulders of giants in Montana in implementing that law and making sure that accurate and authentic information was being taught and shared about our students in all grade levels. I really want to thank again Terry and Matt and everyone at Donnell-Kay, the Denver Indian Center for hosting us. It takes a lot of effort to get something like this together, and I just acknowledge that they did it with a good heart and really good intentions, and that matters to us, I think, a lot. So we're I'm an outsider to your community. I hope by the end of this you'll feel like maybe I've just tried to share a bit of what I've seen around the country, what I've been able to listen and learn related to this really important topic. But really, this is really personal, deeply personal work to you all. And I know that, and I sense that. And it's personal across multiple generations, right? We're talking about our relatives, our ancestors that have gone before us. So it's a continuum that we have been having to live within and often struggle against. But the reality is that the thing that gives me the most hope and the greatest sense of purpose about this is, even today, I heard stories of struggle, but also stories of resilience about your students who attend schools in this area and in this region. And it's not easy. Oftentimes, it feels like you're probably the lone person that's trying to make a difference in a classroom or in a certain school within the district. And I know that's a heavy burden to carry, especially for parents and families and caregivers, but also for our students, because they shouldn't have to be the ones educating teachers about us, right? So I know that, and I know it's a big burden, and I know that that's what makes this space and this time sacred, because we're talking about trying to change an entire system that was not designed for us and consistently works against helping to lift us up, helping us to feel stronger and more purposeful as Indian people in this country. So, there's a sense of urgency about this work, and I just want you to know that I acknowledge all of that. And so why do we do this work? So these are 4 of the reasons why I do it, and you have all of yours either in this room or in the child care room or back at home or elsewhere, right? These are, one child is mine and the other are 2 nieces and a nephew. And I always share this slide because all of these kids have lived with me at different points in their lives, except for my own son, who's lived with me his whole life. And that's pretty common, I think, in Indian country, that sometimes kids move around. And sometimes they might live with a particular relative and then go back to mom and dad, or they might move on to grandma's. And that, what schools would define as transiency. And for them, for schools, that's absolutely seen as a deficit. But in Indian communities and in Indian families, it's more of a strength. It's more of an opportunity. And so that's the way I always talk to schools, is some of the ways, the lens with which you perceive our communities and the way we do things and the way we respond to situations is not fair. and it's not accurate, and it doesn't describe who we are and how we sometimes, you know, share our children and see that as definitely, again, an asset and not a deficit. So and a lot of school principals are like, what are you talking about? I'm like, yes, it's true. It might not be the background that you come from, it might not be the lens with which you view our students and our families, but it is absolutely true. So I just have to set the stage a little bit when talking about Indian education, because really there are essentially two interwoven components here. We can talk about Native education for all, which is teaching about American Indians, and it's absolutely interwoven with Native student outcomes, so teaching for American Indian students. And let me describe that just a little bit. So we know here on the bottom, Native education for all, we have to work harder to improve education about American Indians in this country, and some of it's in that report that's on your table, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about some data that really, I mean, we all know it, we live it, but for the nation to see some of what Americans think about American Indians and how wrong and how false it is really important to have at your fingertips and be able to use in really any realm that you're involved in. So we have to work to correct the damaging narrative that exists about us. We have to rewrite and re-describe who we are and what we want other people to know about us. We have to, again, reclaim that story, and we have to rewrite a curriculum. Because the reality is, what you buy on a bookshelf or from a website, 95% of the time is going to be filled with inaccuracies, stereotypes, misconceptions, and just downright false information. And so if we don't get new materials into the hands of teachers, that cycle, I don't care how many times you review the curriculum. No offense against the bill, but that's just going to keep perpetuating. And so there has to be another intermediary step there to help fix that. And we'll talk about that, sorry. So the other part to this is I just want to say about educators and as a teacher, it's not that they don't want to do the right thing, it's just they were taught the bad information too. And so I know when they call upon us as parents or students to help them, right? Come on, help us teach about Indians and talk about Indians. It comes from a place of their own insecurity and a lack of confidence in material that they're not comfortable teaching or talking about. And so again, that's why creating materials and curriculum is really, really important. And a lot of people, I'll talk more about this later, but want to throw out the local control card. I can tell you in Montana and Oregon, where I've done extensive work, writing curriculum and making sure that it's legislatively enabled, it can be done. So we have a secondary, talking a lot. Okay, we have a secondary purpose in Indian education, obviously. It's related to the bottom because if our kids see accurate portrayals that honor who they are in school and in their classrooms, they're going to do better. They're going to feel better. And success rates across all those realms where, you know, a lot of the outcomes is really negative are absolutely going to increase. But really, it's the right, and it's a treaty right, really, for our students to thrive in educational systems that meet their needs on a daily basis. Not just something that you bring out around Thanksgiving or, you know, Indigenous Peoples Month, but that we are redesigning schools and classrooms that honor and respect who they are and where they come from. And I don't say this lightly, but we're trying to do this work. What Terry and others in Oklahoma City and Albuquerque and South Dakota are trying to do by recreating new school systems is foundational, because every structure that we have been forced to be a part of in any educational setting since colonization has not been designed for our young people. And in fact, it's been intentionally built. They're oppressive structures that are intentionally built to either indoctrinate us assimilate us, or render us invisible and powerless. So if I'm a young student or I'm a parent, why would I ever want to put my kid into a situation like that daily, that does not recognize them, does not see them, doesn't honor them, and doesn't lift them up to be a more successful American Indian person? And it absolutely impacts tribal sovereignty. It impacts, so many realms of leadership and policy. And so we have to, I applaud people that have the courage, like here in Denver, to think about new models and to make those adjustments for our kids. Because the truth is, we had perfectly honed systems of educating our young people. We had been doing it for thousands of years perfectly. Our kids knew exactly what their place was in a community. They knew their role, their function, their family. They knew the land, they knew their language. They knew the universe, they knew the stars. And we did that daily. And when we were forced into a westernized conveyor belt model, we lost so much. But the reality is we're still here, and we can still, because, like God, our ancestors fought so hard to retain so much that we can still build upon those traditional pieces and take what we like from the westernized system and do something new and something different and something more powerful for us. So I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about some research this evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about some data. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some other states and how they're approaching this work, in hopes, again, that it might inspire, it might fire you up, it might get you thinking about new and innovative ways to approach Indian education. It's really about reclaiming this space on behalf of our young people. And I always really work hard to be strengths-based in this work, to decolonize data so that we're not just relying upon a deficits model, that we're not just relying upon something that some researcher wanted to learn about us and came in and studied us from the outside, right? This is about us. This is about questions we have for our own communities and for our own kids, and it's about finding solutions and using data and information and other stories from around the country to do that. Does that sound like what you all thought we were here for a bit? Okay. Sorry, if you walk out, I won't be offended. Okay, we'll go back. Sorry, I gotta set this up. So, Reclaiming Native Truth is an amazing project. I encourage you to go look it out. Many of the people that were involved in this report, Illuminative and others, were also essential to this project. This was a $2 million research project over the course of several years. And they went and they surveyed as many Americans as possible around the country. And they wanted to see, what do people think and know about American Indians? What are their perceptions? And how does that contrast sometimes with the reality? So I'm just going to show you a bit of this, because this explains to you why better teaching about American Indians is absolutely necessary, and it's long, long overdue. So, again, a dominant narrative about American Indians absolutely translates into public policy and opinion about us, which impacts all realms, from healthcare to education, just about anything, and it has an impact. Obviously, there's a lack of representation, and there's also erasure that creates bias. So, Crystal Echohawk, who led this initiative, really had some profound, things to say about it in the end. But basically, that there are so many people out there that don't know us and don't know accurately who we are, that they're not willing to be our allies or advocates. They're not willing to jump on board with us for our social justice issues and other causes, because they have so many misunderstandings. And then lastly, the invisibility, she believes, continues to be a hallmark for racism. So here's a few of the survey findings, and again, this is just to show you that most Americans, or the really out of touch and off base when it comes to American Indians. So almost 60% agree that the United States committed genocide against American Indians. So think about your neighborhood. 6 out of 10 people on your block believe in the atrocities and terrible things that were intentionally poured upon American Indian people. 36% thought that American Indians experienced significant discrimination. Wow. Okay. Why don't you follow me into Kmart sometime? Right? Bias against American Indians depends on region. Again, this isn't going to be anything that surprises folks in this room. By and large, greatest bias shown among those who live nearest a reservation. How many people have lived on a border town? It ain't pretty, huh? There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of, in border towns, changing and shifting identities and politics, and it creates a lot of tension in a lot of border town communities that are near a reservation. People have dual ideas about Indians. Either we are totally impoverished because, you know, the one place that everybody likes to go to write a magazine article or do a news broadcast is where? Or that we just have so much money, you know, it's just falling out of my hair right now. I wish I didn't have student loan debt, right? But we do. We pay taxes, right? So there's all these just misconceptions. That we, you know, we're caretakers of Mother Nature and Mother Earth. The environment is our cause. But then also that our reservations are really trashy. Most people didn't understand tribal sovereignty. How about that as a shocker? I've been building a curriculum for the state of Oregon. We introduced tribal sovereignty at the 4th grade level. We talk about it again at the 8th grade level. We're going to talk about it again at the 10th grade level. You can never talk about it enough. And you can never, there's so many nuances, and there are so many contemporary issues that you can bring in to highlight tribal sovereignty, but it's not just this concept, you know, that evolved 100 years ago. It's actually living out purposefully today. And then, of course, we're all the same, right? We're homogenous. We all lived in teepees, like my tribe. You know, we all roamed the plains in search of buffalo. Where might that narrative come from? Dances with Wolves, and a lot of the movies and film that are out there about American. So, again, this is, when I give presentations, you're not, you know, by and large the audience for this, but I have to really like drive home, like, why this matters. Like, it's important, not just because of that, but it's important because culture and community and diversity are assets. And if you just teach, if your school just functions homogeneously, that is not at all inclusive. It's not allowing a diversity of opinion and thought, and it sounds really boring. Personal connections give us perspective, engage attention, and help us make meaning. There's a ton of new brain research about cultural responsiveness and why it's so important, especially for American Indian youth. I mean, you know, teaching about American Indians can increase compassion. It can reduce prejudice, right? It can help us see each other in new and meaningful ways. Greater inclusion and participation. Can't tell you how many urban schools I've been to around the country, and when I walk into an advanced mathematics class and see not one person of color in there, and no one is asking themselves why. And this last, I've already touched on this a little bit. These are systemic structures and conditions that we have to intentionally challenge. And I think that's part of the reason why you're all here today, you know, engaging in a journey of intentionally challenging structures that are damaging, that don't meet our needs, round peg, square hole, and that need to be rethought. So when I'm talking to school administrators, the thing they always say is, well, where's the research? You know, we really need somebody to have like studied this, even though we're like, duh, like we know this, we experience this, but okay, all right, we want some research. There's a ton out there. These are some of my favorite pieces about why teaching about American Indians in any group is so important. Students feel a greater sense of purpose and connection to what they're learning, and they're more motivated to do well. Surprisingly, if you acknowledge a student and who they are, and their history, and their language, and their identity, and build upon that, and shoot them out into all sorts of new knowledge bases, wouldn't that make you feel good? Instead, if you show up and they tell you things that you know are not true, that they're not what your grandparents or elders or others in your community have been telling you about yourself, fight or flight, right? Discipline disparities exist for a reason, and I really believe this is a part of it. And this is really good because thinking about the ways we communicate in various communities, again, being strengths-based, those are assets. Being able to code switch and talk in different settings is awesome, and it's a strength. And yet, if communities and schools don't necessarily communicate, and families don't communicate in the same way, and transfer information, value those patterns between home and school, obviously, you might probably end up being more, you'd be unenthusiastic about that communication and about what you learn. I've just talked a lot, and you guys could have read those 2 paragraphs. I'm sorry. I'm restating them. I'll be briefer on these. Okay, so the top one refers to research that would apply to all students. Learning about American Indian students gives perspective. And it's really, really valuable to learn different ways and different viewpoints that go beyond your own cultural or social experiences, right? And we don't do enough of that. Again, we tend to teach from one lens, and it happens to often be the lens from which we are oriented and from which we grew out of. And then this last one, I think I've talked a little bit about it already, but Stephanie Freiberg, Dr. Stephanie Freiberg is at the University of Washington, and she's doing a lot to study these narratives, these inaccuracies and stereotypes, and how they actually impact American Indian students, and how fundamental that is, and that they absolutely perpetuate trauma. So I encourage you to look her up, and I always add to this, not only do you have narratives and stereotypes, but you're actually often rendered invisible. You're entirely left out of the discussion. You're left out of the curriculum and the teaching experience, and just how damaging that is. So this is the report that's on your desk. On your desk. Turn to page 5. They say 45 minutes. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go turn over. Okay, so this is a really wonderful report. It was compiled by WEND, by Illuminative, by the National Congress of American Indians, by the National Education Association, and my colleague and I were the researchers and writers of this report. So what we wanted to do, what NCAI asked us to do, was look out across states and see what they were doing to teach about American Indians, and to be able to analyze that in hopes that in certain places, like Denver, Colorado, you could use this information to find leverage points to advance the work in your community. Okay, so you can't read that, obviously, that tiny little square. But just so you know, 87% of state history standards, this is just general information, don't talk about American Indians after 1900. And this is just across the entire country, all 50 states. 27 states make no mention of a single American Indian in their K-12. This is again a big picture. So then we said, okay, well let's dig down a little bit deeper. That was just kind of a landscape analysis. We did a lit review. We said, okay, let's go to the 35 states that have federally recognized tribes. I understand that is not fair. We should have gone to all states because America is Indian country and everybody has an obligation to be teaching about Indians. But we had to start somewhere. So we started with 35 states. Hawaii, we also included Hawaii and Illinois, even though Illinois doesn't have, Hawaiians are not federally recognized, and Illinois does not have a federally recognized tribe. But there's some really cool things going on in Chicago, so NCAI wanted us to include them. Of those 35 states, only 28 responded. And these are people that used to work for the state, like Mandy used to work for the state of Montana. I don't know why I'm talking about myself in the 30%. I used to work in the state of Montana, and I was the director of Indian education. And many states, I'll show you in a minute, have a position somewhat like that. Or they have a part-time position. It might not be a director, it might be a lower level position, but at least there's somebody there trying to, keep everybody accountable. So those are the people that responded to this survey. We did, as I mentioned, a lit review, we interviewed people, and then again we took a survey from at least one person in each state. What we looked at were efforts to develop Native curriculum in a state, any policies or laws. We looked at staff and funding that's dedicated to Indian education. We looked at tribal nation engagement and development of Native American curriculum. And then we looked specifically at experiences with these efforts, successes, challenges, barriers. So that's what you'll find if you dig into that. So some big picture findings. Of those 28 states, 90% of them said they have current efforts underway to improve the quality of and access to Native American curriculum. That's pretty significant. However, very, very few mandated curriculum. And I can tell you the states that actually mandate Montana, Hawaii, Oregon, Washington, and then we kind of get to some gray area. A majority of the states surveyed indicated that Native education is included in their content standards. But again, very few actually mandate specific curriculum. And it's most, obviously this isn't going to be a surprise, it's most likely to be included in state social studies standards. Because we are relics of the past, right? We're not still contributing to America. We don't still write books and draw paintings, build policy, right? So it's easier to relegate us and easier to teach about as a social studies content area. We found that many nations, more nations, are creating their own tribally specific curriculum. It's actually happening in Colorado. Tribal education departments and tribal governments want more inclusion in the education of their citizens. I wouldn't say done. Okay, so only a third of those states that responded to the survey actually allocate funding to build American Indian education curriculum. Can't see up there, Hawaii, Idaho, Montana, New Mexico, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Oregon, Washington, and Wisconsin. All of them, except for Oklahoma, invest public dollars, over $100,000 annually to develop curriculum to be out in schools. One that will be, there's one that we just learned about recently in the state of Minnesota. The Shakopee tribe is giving $5 million to develop curriculum statewide. I counter by saying the state also needs to make a public investment to demonstrate to the entire state. Yeah, the tribal investment is important, but still, as a state, we're sending a very clear message across the educational spectrum that this is really important. So FTE, the number of staff that you might have working in a state education agency. I can tell you in Montana, at the height of our work doing this, I had 14 people working. I had over $2 million every biennium. I could have 6 people writing curriculum and training teachers in how to use it, both in person and online. I could have another batch of people going out and providing Title III services. I could have another batch of people going out and providing literacy or mathematics supports. So staff really, really matters. And that's again why a public investment is really, really important. I was totally unaware that Hawaii had 16 people. I mean, Hawaii is one big school district. I don't know if you know that, but it's really cool. And they're doing some amazing work in Indigenous education. They're like rocking it, especially with their language revitalization. They are something we should all hope to be like. Montana follows. Right now, so we have 8 staff, like I said, again, that are dedicated towards building curriculum. New Mexico has 7. Oklahoma has 6, which just recently happened, but unfortunately in Oklahoma, that's a 2-year appropriation, and they have to go back to the legislature and beg to get the money back to continue to have those staff. Or in most cases, if it's just legislatively bound, then that just exists. Then followed by Washington, Minnesota, Oregon is about to increase because they just got a lot of money from their state legislature, over $4 million to do this work. I'm going to talk about Oregon in a minute. I don't know how Colorado, Wyoming, and Connecticut, I don't know what a half-time or quarter-time or an eighth of a time position could possibly function. It just almost seems gratuitous because you can't possibly, what can you accomplish, right? And Georgina Owen from Colorado, yay, you're awesome. But you have a Herculean effort before you with, very, very limited time dedicated from your agency to do this important work. So I just acknowledge that. And when you look at this, again, doesn't it seem not right? Right? It seems wrong. So again, this is a tool that we hope we can use in the future to advocate for more staff positions to be able to really advance it. This is a hard one. I'm sorry the text is so small, but I'll read the little bubbles to you there. So this is the states that include Native education content in standards and require curriculum, so standards and curriculum, right? So we tell teachers this is what students should be able to know and do by certain grade levels, but how you teach, whatever you teach to get them there is cool. But actually when it comes to American Indians, we're going to tell you what to teach. Those are the states that are in the dark brown. Oh, I forgot about Maine and Florida. Sorry. Okay, so states that include Native education content in standards. Again, so you might say when you're teaching in English language arts, you're teaching students about primary source documents. You might say you could use treaties. That could be an example for a teacher. How many teachers do you think are going to see that standard and say, wow, God, I gotta go learn about some treaties, right? It's a tough sell and a tough lift. There are teachers that do it, and they're awesome, but it's a lot. So there are states that require Native education to be taught in the K-12 system, but they don't necessarily have a specific curriculum. Those are a lighter brown that you can't really see. This is not a good slide because I know the colors are bad. There are the states that were not included in the landscape analysis that are that lightest color. And then states that do not include Native education content and standards and don't require a curriculum are those states in the middle color. we had all this survey information, really good stuff, and what we did was, what NCAI, the National Congress of American Indians, they said, you know what, we really want to kind of come up with some sort of barometer. So let's set some criteria around what a high implementation state would look like, and what a medium implementation state would look like, and what a low implementation state would look like. And if you want to learn about that methodology, it's in the report. I don't talk about it because it's kind of boring. You can see Colorado is in the medium level of implementation. Does that surprise anyone? Surprises you? That it's in. I think there are a couple of reasons for that. Georgina can chime in with me here if she'd like. There is a fantastic tribally specific curriculum in this state. There aren't in many others. So the youth curriculum boosted the score, certainly. That there is some FTE boosted the score some, because in these other states over here, in California, think about it, there's more Indian tribes in California than anywhere else in the United States. Not even withstanding Los Angeles, they have 0 people in their state that are doing anything with the education. So those are just a couple of the factors that put Colorado in that middle school program. Some barriers. A barrier is that tribal nations are often not included in the writing of specific curriculum. That is not a barrier in Colorado, so again, that's something to highlight and to be positive about. Now we just need teachers to start teaching the youth curriculum, and then how do we get to that place, right? Other barriers, a lack, again, of adequate funding. I hope I've made the case about why funding really matters. Local control. Again, by and large, across this country, we will set a standard for a teacher in science and say, kids by 4th grade, they need to be able to know this is where we want them to be, right? And then a teacher gets to plug in, not whatever they want, but, you know, they get to choose how they instruct to get the teacher to that, or the student to that place. The best thing I heard about how to work against that in Indian education was the superintendent of Oregon, which is making a huge investment, writing statewide curriculum and tribal curriculum. He said, we have to write curriculum. Because if we don't, our teachers will continue to teach, to write curriculum and mandate it. Because if we don't, our teachers will continue to teach the same bad material that they were taught. And so this is no time to mess around, because teachers don't have the time, the influence, and sometimes the capacity to go in and rewrite sections of their curriculum to include American Indians. I wish they did. I wish they had time for a lot of things. I wish they got paid $50,000 more a year. I wish, they had better benefits packages. I wish lots of things. But the reality is they can't be done unless we hand them something. And you have to give them good tools that they feel are reliable, that are research-based, that tribes sometimes approve of, that gives them greater confidence to step into an arena that sometimes makes them feel insecure and makes them feel not confident about themselves as a teacher, right? So we worked really hard in Montana with our state teachers union to be supportive of this effort, and that was one of the reasons we've been able to be successful. Other things, lack of professional development. Also, there's a huge question about assessments and evaluation of efforts once they're underway. And then again, just a need to expand beyond social studies and history and content. Opportunities. So some of the things that have happened around the country or are happening. Wow, now you have a fancy one. I'm getting my timeline. The first one was like scrawls, and then I have nice pictures. So you can have state legislation that mandates collaboration that's happening in some states between states and tribes. You can have state legislation that empowers states to write curriculum. You can have state education agencies develop culturally responsive guidelines for districts. That's happening in Colorado somewhat. And then you can have tribally specific curriculum development. And that's really interesting because tribes are like, you know what? We just can't wait for this state to get it together. We just have to create something. But then the trick is, again, how do you get it into the hands of teachers who can use it? So in the back of this report, there are some really great tools. You can look more deeply at what's going on in your state. It has strategies and ideas for mobilizing, whether that be among a community like this, whether it be among a parent group, state legislators, whatever it might be. And then it talks about developing curriculum for your state. Okay, I'm flying through this, I promise. Okay, let's go. So state-specific work. Montana, so we have a law, it's in our Constitution, you have to teach about American Indians. It was unfunded forever until a bunch of school districts got together and they sued our state. And they said, you're not funding education adequately. And they said, the state said, you're right. And our Supreme Court said, and you never funded Indian education for all. So our state gave money to schools and to our state education agency to do a better job. That was the fastest I have ever talked about Montana. My mentor, Denise Juneau, would be upset with me. This is what it says in our Constitution. I just put it up there because I think it's beautiful language. It's the goal of the people to establish an educational system that will develop the full potential of everybody. The state recognizes the distinct and unique cultural heritage of American Indians. It's committed in its educational goals to the preservation of their cultural integrity. And that is really the bedrock of everything. Oregon, I can't show you this video, but later on I encourage you to Google tribal history, shared history in Oregon, and you will get a lovely 5-minute clip that tells you from the perspective of a superintendent, of a student, of a teacher, of a parent, why this work matters. And in Oregon, they don't call it Native Education for All, they call it tribal history, shared history. And it's a remarkable investment, like I said, $4 million, statewide lesson plans, tribally specific lesson plans, and it's awesome. Colorado resources, you do have the Ute curriculum that's available. Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs, I believe there is somebody here who has served on this commission. Hello. I was doing my research about Colorado and I was like, this seems like a commission that could help get this done. So anyway, this is just part of what they're supposed to do, right? And so if people want to pass legislation, they are a sounding board and could help advocate for something to happen down the road. This is the performance that we had to start off our evening. This is the House Bill 191192, the inclusion of American, I don't like that word, in teaching civil government. We are not a minority. However, it could open, it's hopefully opened the door a little bit to have more discussions about why this is important. Don't know, every 10 years in your state people have to get together and talk about curriculum. This creates a special board, a special commission that's going to be deeply invested in these groups and making sure that representation is strong in curricular materials. Essential understanding, I'm just going to point you to these. These are amazing documents. This is from the National Museum of the American Indian. These are large concepts. Any teacher can pick them up off the shelf. If you're working with your students, teachers, or you're a teacher yourself, I highly recommend you access these as a beginning place to do better in the classroom. And so if the teacher's saying, well, I need more stuff for this, and I know you're an Indian parent, then you say, well, it's kind of up to you to do this work. Point them to this. This is an amazing document, it's an amazing resource. Lots of lesson plans there. Montana, these are ours. We have essential understandings. So does North Dakota, Oregon, South Dakota, they're growing, people are doing them all around the country. There's no reason they couldn't be done in Colorado. It sets a baseline of information for teachers, so again, they feel like they have enough, the door is opening. We're giving them the basics about what they can and should teach about American Indians, and hopefully, that gives them an entry point. Not going to go into this space of that. I've talked about it. Wait, I'm not done. I gotta say something about this. And this is because I think, again, those traditional methodologies that we employ to teach our young people can benefit all students, any student in this country. And so there's a lot to learn about Indigenous ways of teaching and knowing. Some of these, again, are things that teachers do anyway, but others, allowing ample time for mastery, public demonstration of knowledge, teaching, emphasizing observation, all of those are essential to teaching about American Indians and teaching American Indian students, and it benefits everybody. Nope, we're not thinking sharing.